What is your childhood memory that you thought was normal but realized it was traumatic later in your life? My friend's uncle wanted me and my friend to model clothes for a catalog. I didn't go, but later discovered that store didn't and never had sold clothing. Turned out he was a pedophile and had been sexually abusing my friend for years. I think we were 8 or 9 at the time. One weird example was when my older brother and I asked for Digimon starter decks for Christmas, but my mom and her boyfriend only had money for one for my brother. I got some cheap squirt guns or something. My mama had to leave for whatever reason and I was pouting. My mom's boyfriend asked me what was wrong and I told him I didn't get a Digimon deck. He went over to my brother and asked him if that was true. My brother looked scared and said yes. All I remember is him hitting my brother all over and my brother screaming, trying to crawl away while he dragged him by his legs from the living room into the kitchen, hitting him all over. Then I remember him throwing him an ice pack. It was normal cause we were beat all the time and it only seemed fair he should get beat real bad since he got the Digimon deck, but I didn't. Growing up, every summer we would pick apples at the local orchard. Lots of apples. Would keep some, but most just went to the orchard. I always thought it was just a fun time out. Would pick up apples, give them to Dad to put in his picking bag, see how shiny you could one, or throw the rotten ones around. 20+ years later it finally occurred to me that it was a little weird, so I asked my dad about it. He looked straight at me and quietly said, with 5 kids we needed the money. I would save my vacation at work and we would pick apples for the extra money. My parents worked their butts off to provide for us, make enough money to pay for half of our university educations, and save for retirement. All the while making it fun. Not really traumatic but eye-opening for me. Huge respect from Mom and Dad. My mom would hide me in the trunk of our car while she drove around at night looking for my dad at his favorite bars. She would eventually find him, they would be yelling. And once I peeked out the back window and saw what I now realize was my dad and a nasty prostitute. FYI, my mom dragged me along because she couldn't leave me home alone. Every time my dad would pick me up from school, he'd leave me in the car for 3+ hours whilst he went into the local pub and got drunk. Nothing to do. Just sitting there in the car. He'd come back after the few hours had passed and throw me a bag of chips as he started the car. I always thought I was the luckiest boy in the world to be getting those chips. My dad took me with him on a run to buy drugs. He made me lay under a blanket in the back seat of the truck. It didn't hit me until like 20 years later what had happened. Same thing happened to me. Nothing like falling asleep on the ride home from school with your dad, only to wake up in some unknown ghetto's parking lot in the dark with no sign of your dad. Luckily he's gone straight, but the one thing he'll never forgive himself for is walking out of his dealer's apartment to see me huddled in the back seat of his car, crying hysterically. As a kid, I used to brag about being able to sleep for over 24 hours straight to friends or teachers or really whoever would listen. I was mid-sentence mentioning it as a freshman in college when I realized my divorced father was drugging preschool me with cold meds so I'd sleep through his weekends of custody with me. It really fucked up my sense of reality for a while. In middle school, I started getting a lot of stomach aches due to undiagnosed acid reflux. I was also a really anxious kid, so I feared I was gonna throw up a lot. Thus, almost every night I'd take half a Tums. When I offhandedly told my best friend, she looked terrified. "I think you might be addicted to Tums," she said. We had just learned about addiction and I told her I didn't feel withdrawal without the medicine and that I was just taking it as prescribed. She still seemed unconvinced, so I told her she was being silly and dropped it. In high school, I learned her brother's drug addiction had been tearing the family apart, and she was probably terrified one of her closest friends was using too. This question reminds me of that Redditor whose mom made him have a butt plug in at all times in fear of the devil doing butt stuff or something. The mom got busted when he had to use the bathroom during school and asked the teacher to help remove his boot plug, or whatever he called it as a kid. Was truly a fucked up story in a similar AskReddit thread. I remember that. The kid had dropped the boot plug into the toilet, flushed it, I believe, and asked a teacher for help to get it back. The mother had schizophrenia, hence the extreme religious thoughts of Satan turning her son gay. I'll stick things up my son's ass, that'll teach him to not enjoy things being stuck up his ass. Dude, I'm not gay. I'd take dick in the ass so Satan doesn't get up there and turn me gay. One time my dad threw a temper tantrum and threw a plate full of food at the ceiling because my mom hadn't gotten the right sauce. I thought it was funny at the time, but looking back, that's an awful way for an adult to act. Many things, but a few examples. Fathers don't teach the 10-year-old daughters French kissing. That they had to renovate the floors because they couldn't get our blood out. That social services took my brother out but didn't even ask about me. Never calling our parents mom and dad but by the first names. Getting sedatives when we were crying too loud or had nightmares. There used to be this man that would live at my house when I was about 3 to 5-ish named Skip, and whenever I would walk by him he would ask me, "You wanna see my sexy leg?" To which I would always respond yes enthusiastically. He would then roll up his pant leg really high and rub his thigh up and down while dog whistling. At the time I thought it was fucking hilarious. Well, turns out he was my dad's meth dealer who needed a place to stay because he was being investigated for murder. I mean, there's a lot. One of my earliest memories is being woken up from my sleep so my dad could beat me with a belt for leaving a pair of shoes on the closet floor. IDKY, he checked in the middle of the night. One time my sister and I woke up to my mom cooking ground beef with her fingers on the coils of the stove with no pan. She decided to go to McDonald's instead, so being 6-ish, I climbed in the car without thinking, stoked for a happy meal. My sister begged me not to go, 9 years old, realizing something was up. We drove a few blocks and she hit a sign and came back without any food. I realized when I was older we could have died that night. My sister told me after the fact she paced outside, hoping we came back. Realistically we might have even been younger than that here, but IDK how I could remember that far back. I played with drug scales as a kid, not realizing what they were for. Our family gatherings included pit bull dog fights, adults smoking blunts and violent movies with graphic sex on big screen TVs. They didn't do the best job keeping the smoke away from the kids. When I smoked weed as a teenager I suddenly felt like a child watching cartoons and realized I'd gotten high a lot as a kid. My childhood was complicated. This all seemed normal until we started going to church and they went crazy with Jesus instead, and then things just got complicated in a different way. Harry Potter was witchcraft so I couldn't read it, secular music wasn't allowed, maybe Creed, etc. I really didn't realize how this stuff wasn't normal until my early teens. My family continues to struggle with drugs, dysfunctional bullshit. My mom passed last year, but I love her no matter how many mistakes she made raising me. I still turned out relatively okay and just try to not let my childhood experiences define who I am now. Luckily my husband and his family taught me what normal can be. My mom taught me how to swim by pretty much drowning me in the ocean. Every time I'd cry she'd go deeper in the water and just let me go, leaving me to go under until I basically learned how to swim by saving myself from drowning. I always thought I was just being a brat because I cried, so it was justified, but it caused me to refuse to ever go into deep water, and I had to reteach myself how to swim for pleasure in my mid-20s. You have just been visited by the study pupper. This pupper will grant you good grades and A's on every test you forgot to study if you comment, "Study the test, pupper."